probably exposing myself a bit here. Like, I'm someone who was fairly financially literate, well educated, from a good practicing Muslim family, and I honestly did not realize how serious riba was. That's the truth, until I began to find out for myself. A lot of information around money and finance. The problem was that it's extremely boring, and it was targeted to, and I say these three intersections: rich, old, white men. Your money, by the way, or your wealth is not the money that you earn. It's the money that you keep and what you do with it.
Today I'm joined by Niaz Azad, founder of Millennial Money UK and host of the Loose Money podcast. Niaz shared with us his journey about starting off in the legal industry and then moving on to launching his own incredible peer-to-peer based learning platform to help millennials and Gen Zs learn about money. He also talks about how his faith and his background really impacted his thoughts on entrepreneurship, money, and how those have changed over the years. This is an incredible podcast for anyone who's thinking about doing something on their own, isn't really sure where to get started, and is having doubts about how they've made their money and how they should be making it more Sharia compliant and ultimately more ethical in the future. As always, I'm your host, Areeb Siddiqui, and welcome to Muslim Money Talk. Niaz, assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
How you doing, man?
Really good, thank you. I'm excited to be here.
No, I'm excited to have you. You're like the podcast content guy, so it was amazing to get you on.
No,
Thanks
not
for
at
doing us
all.
a favor.
No, thank you.
So, I mean, we met only really recently.
Yeah.
At Muslim Tech Fest.
Yes.
First time, which is weird because I feel like we've been moving.
I know, I've been on the
Same
periphery, like, when am I going to get a moment with Areeb?
But yeah, alhamdulillah. So shout out to Zahid and Arfa for setting that up. A lot of beautiful connections happened.
Definitely.
At that
What an
event,
amazing
so
event.
It was incredible, yeah. So really looking forward to the next one. I think the next one's in San Francisco.
Yes,
actually.
yeah, exactly. You're going to make yourself out, you're going to make your way out there?
Thinking of it.
Yeah.
Maybe. Let's see if Kestrl can take on the US.
Yeah.
Do that.
Inshallah, definitely
inshallah,
can.
inshallah. All right, Niaz, well, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
So I wanted to start off with your journey because it's really, really interesting. I think you grew up, you went and did law at uni, then you went and worked for an amazing law firm, Linklaters, and then found yourself thinking about entrepreneurship. So I'd love to ask, how did you get started with Millennial Money UK?
Good question. So I think this is something that we'll probably dive into later as well in some of the themes that we discuss. In my family, I think entrepreneurship has always kind of been like our foundation.
Really?
Yeah. So my dad he was an entrepreneur. He's always been a businessman or making his own money. But his focus was to get his kids really educated and naturally follow, I guess, safer routes in terms of like follow your academic routes and then get into the city. So I think that's why we've kind of had both in our family. So I did that. I was sort of like elder sibling. Law seemed like an obvious thing to do because I wasn't as good as at the sciences, so I didn't pursue engineering or medicine. And the comprehensive subjects was always a bit more of my area of strength. And to be honest, it's probably lack of commercial awareness that I was like, okay, I'm going to be a lawyer.
Well, it's lack of commercial awareness, but it was kind of, I think growing up, there was this idea of safe jobs, safe career paths you could go down. And I know we make this joke that like Asian households, doctor, lawyer, engineer, but it was kind of like, okay, if my child goes away and does that, then they're set. They're always going to be okay.
Yeah.
But you talked about your dad was more entrepreneurial.
Yeah.
So I'm surprised. So you always had it in the back of your mind you could go down an entrepreneurial path.
Yes, I think because it's what we grew up around. It wasn't necessarily encouraged though. That's why it's interesting because although I saw my dad, he built this amazing life for us, made like huge sacrifices. He didn't come from money, but he obviously was able to give us all the things that we had through entrepreneurship. It wasn't necessarily encouraged because I think he preferred that we took what was deemed to be the safer route, like you said, through academia, through getting so-called safer jobs. But I think naturally when you've grown up with a parent who's been in entrepreneurship in some capacity, it doesn't have to be wild entrepreneurship in the guys that we see around us. It could be, I guess, our parents' generation. It could have been shops, it could have been properties, it could have been buying and selling of goods, right? And I think I kind of always had that in me. Like, I'm very grateful for the career that I have as well, but I was always itching for like there's another way, right? There's also other things that you can do of some kind of autonomy. I think that's what the biggest thing is. I think I grew up seeing my dad having a lot of autonomy. And certainly between me and my siblings, my younger brother as well. My younger brother probably more than me, I think craves that autonomy which entrepreneurship provides.
Really?
But that doesn't mean we glamorize entrepreneurship in its entirety. I think the reason my dad probably didn't encourage it is because of how difficult entrepreneurship as well is as well.
Yeah, I think too many people glamorize it online, but as you and I know, the reality is very, very different. So was there like a lightning strike moment where you thought, this is it, millennial money is what I want to do?
Yeah, and I think that came very naturally as well. So I started it with one of my best friends, who's my co-founder with Millennial Money, and it actually came from conversations that we'd been having for a number of years. Because and also a lot of it comes from not knowing and ignorance, because I followed what I was taught, and I suspect many of our generation have always been taught as you do X, Y, Z, and you'll be set. Right? You go to your school, get some good grades, and then you go to a good uni and you get some good grades, and then you get a good job, and you're kind of that will be your life set. And that's kind of the hoops that we were told to jump through. And I think for our generation, we found ourselves jumping through these hoops. I'd sort of gone through these hoops, did well academically, got a good job in the city, and I was like, why don't I have it figured out yet? I've done everything I was told to do. And that's, of course, because we have very different opportunities and a very different economic climate than previous generations who gave us that advice, right? And I began to realize that a lot of what we could learn, or a lot of the advice that we were getting, potentially was a bit outdated. And a lot of what we could learn and should learn is probably from our peers who have the same experiences as us. So as well as the experiences of our mentors and our parents, a lot of the important information that we could and probably should learn is from each other, because we have the same economic conditions that we could. And that's what birthed the initial conversation of Millennial Money, which is it's a community built around a shared experience, which primarily was shared economic and financial conditions, but broader social experiences as well. Because like I said, our generation has the same challenges, which we often hear about, but we also have the same unique opportunities that other generations didn't have, right? So we came into, I guess, a market which has crazy inflated housing market, right? But we also have the internet, which our parents didn't have. So we married the two together and realized that there was a need to build something where people could feel safe learning from each other. And that's kind of where it all started. Fantastic.
So the idea of peer-to-peer learning,
yes,
instead of there being like a central source of knowledge or a guru, a Martin Lewis type figure.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because I think the reason people warmed to us was because we did the complete opposite. We were the anti-guru. So myself and my friend Shaq, who we launched the brand together, we literally positioned ourselves as the fools that have made all the mistakes there is to make. So we were like, listen, guys, like, we are you. Like, we've made all the mistakes there is to make about money. And then as a result, we learned how to get good with money, because we are naturally terrible with money, right? And therefore learn from us, because we're not looking down at you. We can learn together, and we might be able to share some of the experiences ahead of time that you can save yourself from. That's the initial journey that we were on. And I think people warm to that anti-guru type.
Okay, so Millennial Money UK, if you were to sum it up in a single sentence, would you say is like a peer-to-peer platform for learning about how to navigate the world of money?
Yeah, I think that would be a good sales line.
Okay.
But I think broader than that, I think we've kind of distilled it into an online, which we're hoping to take offline as well, community where people are encouraged to join the conversation of money with all of what that involves.
Okay.
Right? Okay. So you can come and feel safe to learn about money together. And as well as that, I think we've become influential voices about the social experiences of young people as well, because you'll find that our generation, there is a kind of like a caricature of like our generation distrusting the generation before us and them distrusting us, but we trust each other a lot more, and it's trying to create that collaboration between us and between ourselves.
And so you kind of got, this seemed like an idea that was building up inside of you for a long time, and then suddenly you came up with this idea. It's really interesting to say you founded this with your friend Jack. Right. Normally, like when we've gone through like venture accelerators, startup schools and all that kind of thing, the number one thing they often tell us is don't start a company with your friend. right? Because maybe you get on with someone really well in real life, but when it comes to like conflict resolution, which often happens, that's where relationships can really fall apart. How have you found that?
It has its challenges, which is completely true, and I can see why. I think we have been good that I took a decision to like prioritize our relationship and our friendship as well, and understand that there will be instances where one of us will have to pull more weight, right, in certain things, and leaning into each other's strengths. But it's the same with family as well. I'd say family and friends. I often hear, be careful about going into business with your family and friends, because there's more than a commercial relationship with each other, and which can make it tricky.
Yeah.
And when you're running a business, you do have to sometimes be quite ruthless. Is quite a pointed word. Sometimes you have to make challenging decisions, which you may not agree with each other on. But I think if you can work through that as well, certainly in the initial phase, I think I'm so glad that I was able to do it with my friend, because at the start, especially for the kind of brand and company that we've built, it requires you to find the joy in it together when everyone else will be like, what the hell are these two doing, right? You need to find, when you're making no money, when you're doing this and everyone's like, oh, what are they doing? This is a bit weird, right? Because it's fine now when it's successful and everyone's like, oh, this is so cool, look at what they have. But it's easy to say that now. In those first few months, the first year, before it was glamorous at all, you were there whilst everyone was sort of socializing, and you're like, okay, we should put this stuff together. We were putting our own money into things, knowing that there may not be any return. So in that period, it's really helpful, especially if you have a bond with someone. I think it enhances the experience.
Yeah, it's like having a confidant, right? Because you're like doing something together, kind of secretly, and
it's so funny because I look back now, and obviously we've been in amazing conversations in amazing rooms that when we look back on now, we're like, oh wow, that's pretty cool. But at the start, we had such small expectations, and we were like celebrating every time we got 1,000 followers, and like, you know,
that's huge.
Like, yeah.
I hope we get 1,000 followers.
You will,
inshallah.
Inshallah, you will. Inshallah, you will. And that obviously those are the kind of things that are just so like amazing to you back then, right? And since then, you reach millions of people, and you don't celebrate the same way, right? Because obviously we know about insan as Muslims, right? Where they're never going to be pleased the more you get, right? But it's special to have those experiences as well. So I would say, yes, it is challenging, but the reverse can also be true.
Yeah, I mean, look, I started a business with my dad and my friend from business school, so I get it, right? You have some really difficult conversations, some pretty bad arguments, but I think it can help in that, okay, at the end of the day, you're still, you have an outside relationship outside of the business, which can help kind of bind things together and stop things from breaking apart completely.
Absolutely.
If you're strangers, it's way easier to walk away, I guess.
Yes.
All right. So take me back, because you were what, 24, 25 when you came up with the idea?
Yeah, I think I must have been 25. Yeah, 25. Crazy. 25. Yeah.
25. How old are you now?
I'm 30.
You're 30. Okay.
Yeah.
Gosh, you're still young.
I'm glad you say so.
So 30 years old now. You're doing it for 5 years.
Yeah.
You came up with the idea. What was the first? Was it you or was it Shaq? Because you can make the first phone call, I guess.
But I was just on my way to work, and I called. We'd regularly talk anyway. He's one of my like closest friends. So I called him. I was like, did I call him a text? I was like, bro, like I've got this idea, and I think this is, because we'd been talking about wanting to do some kind of business for a while, and it was so funny. At the time, he was just like, I can't concentrate at work. Like I keep thinking of these ideas, and it was at the time it was just such a simple idea. We didn't really even know where or what we wanted to do with it. But he was like, yeah, let's do it. Let's just go in. And we didn't even have a lot of money at the time. Obviously, we had our jobs and our careers and whatever money we'd save from that. But we were like, yeah, let's just go for it. And I think that early naivety benefited us. And there's also fortunate timing with everything, because we'd started this conversation maybe 6 months before the pandemic. And then we'd done like loads of preparatory work. We'd like had like brand consultations. We worked with a branding agency, and we were sort of like getting things going. And then lockdown happens, and we were like, what do we do? And then Shaq was like, let's just launch. And obviously that was fortunately timed for us, because suddenly everyone's at home on their phones, really concerned about their money. So it all coalesced at like a perfect time for us.
Perfect moment. Yeah. I think it's Ali Abdal. I think I watched a video of his a while back where he said your success can be boiled down into like 3 factors. Like one is your hard work, your perspiration. Second are your unfair advantages, and third is luck.
Yeah,
it's very hard to quantify, but you can kind of make your own luck.
Absolutely.
Going out and finding those opportunities. What unfair advantages do you think really helped you in starting this versus your hard work?
I would say actually we did have some when I think back, because I think some of the things that at the time, so this was like a pre-video era. Obviously now social media, everything's about video and like high production. At the time, Instagram, for example, was very image based. I actually did art A level.
Did you?
Yeah, I did art A level.
I did art GCSE.
Did you?
So, yeah.
Oh, amazing.
It was the hardest one.
Yeah,
for sure.
with a 10-hour exam. So I'd always had that side to me where I enjoyed design.
You get an art scholarship?
Yes, I did. Yeah, that's really good
Okay.
knowledge. That's crazy. That's really good knowledge.
So where was that to? To sixth form or?
To sixth form at Chigwell. Yeah.
No way.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which I actually turned down. That's really good knowledge. That.
There you go. We do our research.
Yeah. No, I'm really impressed. But because I had that like background interest in art and design, it meant that we didn't have to rely on graphic designers to make the content for us.
Okay.
So we could divide and conquer really well. So Shaq could do a lot of the research and articulation in the early stages. I could put the designs together, and between us, it was basically shoestring, like just churn out content that people really wanted to find out. We could come up with ideas together. So I guess that was one of the unfair advantages that we had. The other thing is I think our level of education probably did help, because the information that we were consuming, which today kind of still exists, I think now 5 years into it, there's a lot more voices like us which have been taking this financial information and preparing it and disseminating it for an audience that, for a mass audience basically. But at the time, I think a lot of information around money and finance, the problem was that it's extremely boring, and it was targeted to, and I say these 3 intersections: rich, old, white men, right? And that we hadn't really fully appreciated that, but effectively a lot of this information, that's who it was targeted at. And we were like, okay, how can we take this and encourage people like us, young people, to engage with this information? And quite quickly we realized how challenging those intersections. Everyone else was like, okay, this is really good, I want to engage with this kind of information. We found like a lot of women were finally being like, okay, I feel empowered to engage with this information. Another thing that we didn't appreciate was Shaq and I, neither of us are white. We'd never even considered that, but in our DMs we'd get people saying like, I actually only have grown to appreciate this, even more so in the context of being Muslim now in the last 2 years. I think I've been much more public about my faith and how that impacts my life. People messaging saying like, it's so nice to see someone that's black that's doing this. So obviously with Shaq or with me, like, oh, it's really amazing to see Asian people talking about this kind of stuff. And we'd just be like, we're just
I never
guys.
considered that before.
We're just some guys.
Yeah.
We'd never really considered it. But I think I spoke to another friend of mine who said that he's a successful entrepreneur. He's onto his second startup, and he says that seeing is believing. And when people see themselves in you and they see people talking a certain way and acquiring success or information, they then realize that it's within reach for them. So we found, I guess, by chance, and whether that's an unfair advantage as well, that a lot of people were flocking to us for multiple different reasons and feeling safe to engage with this kind of information with us. And it felt a lot like a come learn, let's build together type of experience.
Sure.
So that was another thing. But again, just coming back to the point of, I say our level of education helped in that we were able to take this information and re-communicate it to an audience that just like ourselves.
So you launch it in the first few weeks. You've done the branding, you engage with the branding agency. I guess you do the website, the socials. At what point do you start to realize this is starting to take off?
We were always quite bold, I'll be quite honest. I don't know why, but we were always quite, from very early on, having like brand discussions.
Yeah.
I don't know what encouraged me to be so bold, but we'd go into like big brand conversations with like reputable names, and I'd sit there and say, we're more expensive than other people, by the way, from at the start of in the pitch, from when we shouldn't have done that. I was like, we're more expensive. That's because you can see our stuff. It's better. I shouldn't say it's better. I shouldn't have said it's better, but something to that effect, where I'd say like, you can see what you're getting with what we produce. People buy into what we're saying, and you can be part of that, but we're not going to be the cheapest. And I think just really believing that from the outset really helped us. I don't know. I just
I guess it's attributing value to what
it
is you're doing.
Because I think what a lot of like creators I think did, because we kind of straddle that creator brand section as well, right? I think a lot of people is they get a lot of attention online, and then they're like, oh my god, this is so cool. How can I turn this into a business? Whereas we were faceless for a long time, and it was just a brand. So we'd gone into this whole thing with the idea of it being a business. So I think early on we were thinking quite commercially. Don't get me wrong, we were still very naive and we learned a lot along the way. But I think because we were able to enter these discussions knowing that, okay, yeah, you can work with us, but this is how much it's going to cost.
Yeah. No, I'm thinking of similar conversations we have at Kestrl. It's so interesting how our stories are kind of mirroring, because we came up with the idea for Kestrl, then lockdown happened, and we were like, oh man, what should we be doing? And then suddenly there was an influx of activity from Muslims who were really struggling with what to do with their money. A lot of people were being laid off, losing their jobs, thinking of side hustles, all that kind of thing. So we found a lot of early success. Do you remember Clubhouse?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
So the name of this podcast is Muslim Money Talk, but we used to have a show on Clubhouse called Muslim Money Talk.
No way.
We used to do it 3 times a week, and we would talk about personal finance, Islamic finance, and entrepreneurship stuff. That's how we built our first audience for Kestrl, like before we had an app or anything. But we had like 10,000 followers at one point.
Oh wow!
Yeah, directly. We were really proud of at the time.
And this was pre-product.
This is pre-product.
Oh wow!
Pre-product. We launched our product like I think 9 months later, because we did like a funding round.
Wow. Okay.
Had to launch that, but yeah, and then Clubhouse like died a death.
Yeah.
We can dissect that if we want, but this is kind of us trying to grasp that again a few months later. But I just wanted to go back to that journey. So you started off really commercially minded with what you wanted to do. What were those different revenue lines you considered early on? Because I think I'm not quite clear on, and maybe the listeners aren't either, as to how Millennial Money actually makes money.
No, that's fine. Yeah, no, I think a lot of people are confused by it. To be honest, and there's loads of things that go into it, because there's so many ways that we can still commercialize and monetize the brand and haven't done so, but it's in the pipeline. Sure. Or like for multiple reasons we sort of like refrained from. So our initial plan was like build a really strong brand. A majority of our revenue came from brand partnerships. Okay. Then we began to do workshops. We'll do like corporate workshops as well. So that would be a lot of our offline stuff, which generated revenue as well. And then the plan was, and we had conversations around publishing. So potential like publishing deals for books, etc.
You guys have a book?
No.
Oh, okay.
So we were speaking to quite a large publisher. That conversation kind of went away through our own like capacity and like being able to. Yeah. And again, those are the challenges of like both of us still working full time.
Did you never go full time?
I had the option to a couple of times, and then and thought about it, and then never did.
Why?
I don't know. I honestly, so part of it was I was going to do it. I was just being cowardly, I think. And I think it's also because we hadn't productized. Yeah. Which we might not, or we might productize in different ways through digital products, etc. I was like, okay, what am I going to go after if I quit my job? What am I going to go after? And I think it's also I think that's part of entrepreneurship. People's like high tolerance to risk helps them, but being in the kind of career that I'm in, I think that's the negative impact as well to bravery with entrepreneurship, because there's a safe option for me that covers me as well.
I think that's that. I mean, when we started with Kestrl, I was working full time at PwC.
Yeah, I remember.
So I did graduated from the MBA. I had this job offer already, so I went back and did that whilst I was working on this in the background, and dying, like blessing my co-founder. he had decided quite early on he was going to not go back to Malaysia, not go back to his job, and just figure this out at Kestrl in the background. So he was doing all kinds of stuff like Uber Eats, Deliveroo, whatever he could, whilst doing, you know, the business plan and all that. And I was going off and talking to potential investors. And I remember having a really frank discussion with Dying as to at what point do I join him, right? At what point do I cut this and run it? It was like, okay, it's September now. If we don't have like an investor, I think because when you're a fintech, you have to raise money to get a license and start to, you know, pay a team to do something. So it was a lot harder to get started. So we thought 6 months we'll give this. And when we've not done it and we've not found some decent backers, we'll drop it. We'll drop the dream. And alhamdulillah, it was, I think, in the 6th month that we found a few people angel investors, people from the Islamic banking scene, who then came on board as angels and advisors who are on our board to this day. So alhamdulillah, that's like how it started, and we managed to take the leap of faith, if you will, and go full time. And I think it's also when you have investors, shareholders, they kind of expect you to go full time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's the thing. So you kind of have to. But there were a lot of times where I was like,
there's an element of tawakkul as well, right?
Yeah.
And I think I kind of compare it to, because there's other Muslim founders like yourself that I respect hugely that have told me like, why don't you go full time? Quite a few actually. So the guys at IFG and Curate.
Oh yeah, Ibrahim and Mohsin.
Yeah. Great. Yeah, incredible what they're doing. And Mohsin has said to me a few times, he was like, just, you know, like get these things in order and then just do it. Because actually IFG is like a Muslim Millennial Money in its original format. Yeah. They're like the Muslim version of Millennial Money, right?
I saw you guys as the not the non-Muslim.
Yeah, no, but it is. It's the secular.
It's the
secular version,
sure,
right?
Sure.
And obviously they've been around for a long time and putting out some incredibly valuable work. But I think as well, like kind of content that we put out, to a certain extent, it probably benefited the fact that I could say that I'm still working and relate to a lot of people, and be like, this is how I engage with like my revenue from work and this is how I manage my money, etc. To an extent, I think that the relatability could help as well at a certain time. Sure. And we've also like naturally, and I've seen your journey with Kestrl, the brand develops, and I think you begin to realize what people come to you for.
Yeah. I mean, look, we started off very consumer focused.
Yeah.
And then banks started to come to us saying, look, can you white label your service, help us to go digital? So we went down like this slightly different path. Like the mission was the same, helping Muslims, but it was like the route to get there was partnering. But I feel like that diluted our brand quite a bit with the consumer market.
Yeah.
I think we faced a choice where it was like, okay, let's go down very content driven, very IFG-esque. Let's keep on putting out blogs and socials and videos and all that. And then really we just had to be steered by where was the money coming from at the time. Yeah. So, we made those choices, and alhamdulillah, it's worked out. That's why we're still here. And a lot of our competitors at the time, unfortunately, are not. But, I think there was always a part of me which was like, the reason I started this was to help people like me. Yeah. Right. And that's why I've always looked at what you guys are doing in IFG, feeling like that we always need people like that in the community. Yeah. Right. That peer-to-peer learning thing is super important.
And there's space for everything. And actually, this is the year I've seen, not just with Muslim startups, scale-ups, it's been the pivot to B2C this year from a lot of our old clients as well. And it makes sense, I guess, financially in these kind of markets. It's really hard to have a consumer-only focus. So I completely understand that kind of pivot as well. But and the consumer market is there. I think they were for a paralysis of choice. So I'm talking from the content angle as well, because there's so much information out there. So particularly when it comes to like money and finance, and as this area has matured, for us it's been like, okay, first of all, a balance of like, what do we enjoy? What can we speak authentically to? Money can be quite a boring topic. What is it that people come to us for? And at the same time becoming, I guess, a kind of a production house as well is what I'm leaning into.
Because you've had some pretty viral videos, like huge.
Yeah, alhamdulillah.
So, I mean, what were the absolute highs? Like if you had to say top moments.
There's been so many. Honestly, some of the best moments were probably like the smallest wins at the start, because it's so novel. Yeah. Like I remember for a while, Shaq and I would message each other when we'd get like another 1,000 followers, as I said, and we'd be like waiting it'd be like 11, 12 past midnight. He's like, oh, congrats, bro, we just hit another 1,000, you know, right at the start. And now followers don't actually matter anymore. Like, this was back in the day when it did matter. Now, like, your reach is far beyond your following, right? And then since then, there's been like, I've wanted to move more into like a creative director capacity, and we've funded some pilots for like new series that we've launched. We did one recently at the end of last year, so fairly recently, which went super viral. I think we reached over 2 million people with a concept that we were like, why don't we just test it? But it had like a theme behind it, which was to challenge people's preconceived notions of money, income, wealth, to status. And we did that by a very like un-British concept of like quickly engaging with someone and then trying to guess how much money they made. And and like creating quite funny interactions.
Okay.
And that went super viral across platforms. So that was really cool because it showed us that we don't have to be boxed into like talking about the same concepts of here, this is how you should save, this is how you should budget. We're like, money doesn't have to just be limited to that, right?
Why do you think people are so uncomfortable talking about how much they make?
It's just not a very British thing. And then so there's two lenses, right? There's the Muslim, which is a broad diaspora as well. Like in our communities, we talk about nazar and like we talk about ayn so nazar and ayn. I think people are like, oh my God, I don't want to come across as though I'm showing off. Will it impact my wealth? Am I going to damage my own wealth? I think with the British thing as well, it's just like seen as people are just a bit more tight. They tighten up around it a bit because it's...
Yeah. Do you think it's an idea of perception? Like,
yeah,
you want to make people believe you're doing much better than you actually are.
I think there is that side of it as well, which is a danger that we warn against. We can come on to this as well, because I think it's something that is a huge danger the Muslim community needs to be careful about, especially as we begin to acquire more wealth. But it's so funny because in America, it's not like that at all. In America, they love talking about money, and it's so like, but it's not in like not necessarily in a braggadocious way either. And people receive it really well. I think it's just a real cultural change. But because of that, like the American version of Millennial Money is like, it would explode. It has exploded. Like the financial content creators in America, they are like raking it in. Like
really?
Raking it in. Like, but I guess everything in America, the brand deals that you get, everything, the numbers are just a lot higher, right?
Thank you for listening to Muslim Money Talk. If you like what you've heard so far, you might be interested in checking out what we do at Kestrl, the Muslim Money app. Kestrl is a service that helps Muslims who want to grow their wealth without having to compromise, whether it's on their belief or user experience or price. I founded Kestrl because of how fed up I was at how poor Islamic financial services were in this country. Often people didn't use them because of how bad the user experience or customer service, and indeed how high on price they were. So Kestrl was the answer to that. If you download the Kestrl app today, it can help you by creating a budgeting plan. Plug in whatever bank account you have and it will create a auto budget just for you. You can then tell us what goals you're saving for and we'll save towards them automatically into pots, and then crucially link you towards Sharia-compliant investment and savings products as well. So download Kestrl today and try it out for yourself. Now back to the podcast. We talked a lot about your career so far and just winding it back to your parents' perception, because they must have thoughts about what you've been doing. And the reason I ask is because when I told my parents what I was doing, it was very much like, what the hell are you doing? Right? You've just spent all this money, getting these degrees and all of this. And I did something really controversial, which was leaving management consulting. And I took a year out to do an MBA, which my company wasn't going to pay for it. So I paid for it myself. And again, that was very much like, why are you doing this? Because it's not just you're paying loads of money for this degree, but it's a salary sacrifice of the year which you're out. And then they're like, okay, you need to go back to a very high paying job, which alhamdulillah I was at. Then I left it to do a startup. Do you think that might have played into why you're not full time?
Yeah, definitely.
Really?
100%. Are you the elder sibling?
I'm the eldest of 3 brothers.
Yeah, so I'm the eldest as well. So I think there was always a bit more pressure to play it a lot more safe. So with my younger siblings, alhamdulillah, I'm glad. They, even to this stage, have been able to take more risks, I think, than than myself, because for my parents, I think I'm the experiment that has to prove things right. So
We are the experiment,
right? And because of that, I have to like make sure that my parents are reassured that it will be okay, which is so funny because, and I see where it comes from, like unconditional love and protection from our parents, right? But my dad achieved so much success from great risks, but I can't show him that. I can't reason with him in that way, and I don't think I've even tried. So I think.
Why do you think that is? Do you think it's because it's very hard for a parent to listen to their child?
No, I think with my dad it's different because, so alhamdulillah, he did really well in business throughout his life, right?
Okay.
Especially considering where he came from, as in his beginnings were very humble.
Are you guys from
Bangladesh? So we're from Bangladesh, and a lot of stories are, a lot of people I know when they have immigrant family, immigrant household. My mum was born and brought up here. My dad was born in Bangladesh. Usually there's like, they have a lot of wealth back home, and then they come from wealthy families back home, and then they come here, and then it's like, oh my God, we have to start again. With my dad, it wasn't like that. He actually came from a very humble family in Bangladesh, but then he did well there. He did really well there from very humble beginnings.
What did he do?
So he owned quite a large construction company which got government contracts to build up the infrastructure of Bangladesh, right? Okay. So as you can imagine, in a country that isn't developed, the infrastructure projects are huge because it's not construction in like a residential property, it's construction to build a bridge or a highway. So he owned a construction company which would build like motorways and like bridges in Bangladesh. So but he came from no money, right? And then did well. But I think for him, he did well in business, and he would find himself in rooms. This is my perception of it, and from what I've gathered from growing up and listening to conversations, he would find himself in rooms where he may have acquired more wealth than a lot of people, but he wasn't as educated as. And I think he's always had this feeling that, it's so funny because you always look at what you don't have, right? That my kids are going to be educated.
Yeah, of course.
And alhamdulillah, and may Allah bless my parents and reward them greatly. My dad prioritized education for us, in me and all of my siblings. So he was like, he'd sacrifice certain luxuries to be like, no, education is your play, which is why we went to the schools that we went to. Because of that, there were different expectations. I think because he always saw his route to success, or whatever material success he had at different points of his life, it just came with so much hard labor that he didn't want that for us, but not realizing the extreme privilege in that labor as well. And I think for me, that's why I've kind of like done both. I've kind of had both and done both. But who knows? I feel like I'm still young enough to be like, maybe at some point you're
not married, are you?
No, not yet.
Okay, you heard it here first. All right, if you want to say. So yeah, no, it's a perfect. When I started Kestrl, because I'm married now, alhamdulillah, and you know, got a kid. I keep on thinking, if I were in the same position now, where I was working full time and thinking about doing something like this, I couldn't. It would be crazy stupid. Just risking everyone's livelihoods and future. I don't think I would ever be brave enough to do it. But then there's another part of me which thinks that your rizq is always written. Everything is in hand and is planned. And there was this really scary moment during Kestrl. I don't talk about this often, so I'm not sure. I'll do it. Okay, so there's this really scary moment in Kestrl, probably back in 2022. I'd been married like 5 months. And it had gotten to a point where our last funding round was drying up. Wow. So we had maybe like 3 months of money left. And as founders, we were like, we can't draw a salary for the next 3 months. It's just so we can extend the runway. Let's just give it all to our employees and keep the app running. And we didn't have enough traction that we could raise another round. And we just thought, what is going to happen? And then suddenly the bank from Malaysia
came at that time.
And they said, listen, we like what you do, can you white label the service and help us to actually launch a digital bank, the first digital Islamic bank in Malaysia. And subhanallah, it was like, this is incredible. And it was around this time that I found out that my wife was expecting, and that's where I thought every child comes with their own risk. Like we know that. So this must be where it's coming from.
I think so too.
You know.
Alhamdulillah. And I actually have a funny story about that. So my dad, as you can imagine, he's getting on to me. He's like, "What? Why are you getting married? Why?" So and then I'm always like, "Dad, I will. Like, I'm inshallah. Like, make dua for me." But he said something to me, which you've just reminded me of, and because my dad actually, he actually had me for that generation, he had me quite late. So he was 30 when I was born.
Okay.
Or just about to turn 30 when I was born.
Yeah.
And he said to me, and by this point his business was taking off as well. And he said to me, what I achieved in the year after you were born is more than the last 8 years combined.
SubhanAllah.
And he when he said that to me, I was like, well, yeah, that's a good. Sometimes it's easy to just brush away what your parents say to you, but sometimes my dad they really stick with me, some of the things that he says. And he was like, I'm telling you right now, after I got married and especially after you were born, I achieved more in that following year than I did in the last 8 years. And I couldn't even imagine where that money was coming from or where that success was coming from.
Wow.
So I think, and as we know in Islam, like we know that children are part of your rizq, right? And family is part of your rizq. And your wife, your relationship, your marriage is part of your rizq, which is written. So I can completely see that. I'm saying this and I'm like, wow, I need to really pull my finger out.
And yeah, just go for it. I mean, we don't need to go down that route too much. But as a Muslim working in the space, what do you think are some of the biggest money problems that plague the Muslim community right now?
That's such a good question, and there's so much, and I can relay this with my own journey with like becoming financially literate. And then being like, oh wait, I'm Muslim. There's more things that I need to consider. So, and I'll be open about my own ignorance because I think there's going to be a lot of people that are in this position, right? So there's where most people are right now, where they feel like I have no idea where to start with my money, and then by engaging with some of the information that we have out there, maybe using Kestrl and like so many other sources as well that we have, they begin to learn about money, and they're like, okay, I can budget and I've got myself into a good position. I've cleared any debt that I might have. And then I'm thinking about investing and, I'm learning about money. I'm understanding how to build my financial future. And then you start to get into a position where you're like, oh, wow, like I've got some investments. I've got some good savings. I've got no debt. I feel like I know what I'm doing when it comes to my money. And then it's like, hold on. I never considered the fact that I have to be more careful about where my money is because I'm Muslim. And there's this whole other world which I hadn't considered before. What is riba? Interest? Sorry, where do I even begin to think about divesting my money from that? And then it's like, oh wow, I have to work backwards again, and then realize how can I operate within this framework that is so driven by things which pose challenges for us as Muslims.
Did that moment hit you?
Yes, yeah, 100%.
So when was that?
A few years into my investing journey, so a few years, and out of pure ignorance, because obviously the natural way when you learn about investing, let's say for example, and how to hedge your investments to make them a bit more safe, you might be looking at things like bonds, which are completely haram, like for the most part, right?
There are halal bonds out,
of course,
there,
yeah. For the traditional ones that I would be looking at the time when I first began learning,
for sure,
we'd be looking at like corporate bonds and government bonds, which were not halal, which we should be avoiding, right? And then I'd be like, oh my God, wow, I have to relearn how I can manage my money. And then thinking about the kind of investments that you're making, where is your money being held? But actually, I think when you fast forward, learning about that extra level of complexity makes you a better investor, makes you much better at managing your money. But it was definitely a challenge because then I sat back and I was like, I'm in this world where I'm like learning about money and teaching about money. But there's an additional layer entirely that I have to think about. It actually, even for Millennial Money, there was challenges because I was like, we were getting loads of offers from companies that I wouldn't feel comfortable working with because it would be promoting credit lines that, again, I'm like, I can't really be promoting this. I can't really be speaking about this. This isn't really right with me. So it started another whole learning experience, and it showed me how challenging it is to operate as a Muslim within, not just within finance, but within the management of my own wealth, which I think a lot of people reach. And also the other thing is, and this is a challenge that our generation faces, is that a lot of what exists is like, let's say fatwas, for example, compromises, concessions that were built for a generation before us,
Absolutely.
who had much less resources. And we kind of just follow on from that example rather than thinking about how we can operate.
You're talking about the age-old debate, how Islamic is Islamic finance, I guess. Which
amongst
is,
other things.
We had Umar Sulaiman in the most recent episode, the CRO at Wahid, and he put it very eloquently, which was that the original system of Islamic finance that came about 25, 30 years ago with the likes of Al Rayyan Bank, before Islamic Bank of Britain and HSBC Amana, they were built by previous generations to provide something that was Sharia compliant within the framework, which was very, very conventionally driven, very Riba based. It was impossible to make something 100% Sharia compliant the way we did it. So the idea was that this was a step in the right direction, but it was never meant to be the end goal, right? So that's where the idea of commodity murabaha came from, which is this idea of, okay, how different is an Islamic mortgage from a real mortgage? What's the difference between interest, which I'm paying, versus profits on which I'm paying on this halal mortgage, which will happen to be more expensive, right? And it was always meant to be, innovation was meant to keep on happening.
Yes.
But that's where it fell apart. Right? Everything kind of stopped, and then you have these big Islamic banks, and that's the reason I started Kestrl, and the reason Wahid got started, and Faida and Nestor and Cardus and all these amazing other Islamic fintechs, which we're lucky enough to be a part of that ecosystem, was because for years nothing had happened, and then this young generation came in who were like, what is going on? Right? We need something that makes sense to us Islamically. And I think it's partly because Muslims in the UK, out of a lot of Western countries, tend to be way more religiously minded.
I've heard that.
I've found.
I was actually speaking to the taxi driver on the way here about that. He was saying the same thing. He's lived across Europe. And he says that the Muslim community here is like firm on their faith.
For sure. No, I mean, I know the founders of another Islamic fintech in Germany who really tried to launch a digital bank there, just thinking everyone's going to flock to us because we're avoiding riba, and that's the foundation. But the Muslims there had lived for generations without a concept of Islamic finance. Mainly from Turkish background, moved in after World War II. So like 3-4 generations or so. So they didn't really get it. Right? It wasn't. Just saying it was Islamic was not enough of a driver, and arguably is still not enough to this day. Right. Which leads me to my next question, which is, some people think it shouldn't be Islamic finance. It should just be finance, because for this to work, it should be something which is really good. An Islamic financial system should benefit anyone.
Absolutely.
Right? It's not just us avoiding interest for the sake of it. It's that interest is fundamentally toxic to society and ends up crippling people in debt and all kinds of things. Have you had any thoughts about that with Millennial Money?
With Millennial, so I think the way Millennial Money ties into this I guess concept, or how we can benefit the ecosystem, and I guess me being a founder of Millennial Money, and then as Niaz, I think I'm sort of moving into more speaking about my experiences as a Muslim managing his wealth, right? Is the education piece, because so much of it has to be, and similarly for you, is unfortunately for our generation, what we've reached is we must educate and then give them an option as well. We can't assume that there's a sophisticated base that understand Islamic finance, that understand the guardrails that exist and why they exist, and we're kind of doing that learning and then sharing at the same time. So I think from our perspective, it's about teaching the benefits of the things that we've been taught and we know already. Why interest? It's so easy to be like, oh, but everything's so hard for us. If riba was fine, we'd all be rich, right? But understanding that there's an exploitation element to the riba-based system that exists, right? Yes, people are profiteering and becoming extremely wealthy, but what you fail to see is the impact on the other end of that, and there is an exploitation at somewhere down the line. And there's extreme examples of that, which we can talk about, like causing some of the problems that we're seeing in sub-Saharan Africa and Congo and in Sudan, like in, and actually a lot of that can be tied back to interest. And the need for maintaining riba-based systems. So the evil goes beyond just making money.
So tell me about that one with Sudan, because I think I saw a couple of articles about that recently, but what's the link? For people listening, they're like, okay, what does
Yeah.
genocide happening in Sudan have to do with me having a savings account with Barclays or?
And I can give like a loose link, and I would say have great follow up resources to listen to some podcasts by Sami Hamdi, and he goes into it a lot. But the unfortunate thing about what's the catastrophe that's happening in Sudan, what I've learned is that there's the RSF, which is a paramilitary force, who is basically at civil war with the Sudanese army. So it's two men that previously worked together. I think it's Hemeti, who is the leader of the RSF, and they are funded largely by the UAE. Yeah, it's crazy. This is what I mean. It's Muslims creating fitna, but we know this has existed.
Yeah.
So largely funded by the UAE. And what Sudan has, there's a couple of reasons why. What Sudan has is gold. There's a lot of gold in Sudan, and you'll find, unfortunately, when you go to the UAE, why is it that gold is so much cheaper to buy in the UAE, in Dubai, than anywhere else in the world? Because
it's from conflict regions.
Yeah, they're from conflict regions, namely Sudan. What Sami Hamdi has gone on to say as well, part of it is Sudan was always quite strongly opposed to the Zionist occupation in Israel, and actually quite resistant to normalizing with Israel. And the UAE, you'll find, is much more open to normalizing a riba-based financial system. Sudan was seen as one of the players within the region that were resistant to a lot of that, in particular to riba-based financial systems as well. So again, all of this comes into it, right? And which is part of the incentive for Sudan to be destabilized, funded by the UAE, weapons being sold by Israel.
Okay.
And again, this comes because you want to maintain a status quo, part of which is the financial system, which is a globalized riba-based system. So when we think that, how is it if I take a bit of interest here, it's not gonna, how is that gonna impact this part of the world? But actually, you can see it impacting your own ummah, because the upholding of a riba-based system in Dubai, which a lot of us are trying to flock to, for example. I know from the UK, we're going to get tax-free money.
There's so many people say I'm going on hijrah.
Exactly.
Country,
exactly. So you realize how interlinked it can all be. Same with Congo, right? Again, it's about resources, and interest comes into play. We know all the cobalt, for example, the cobalt mines in Sudan. Sorry, not in Sudan, in Congo. And you see some of the images coming out of that. And again, that all of that material, the minerals and everything that are being mined are owned by, it's not benefiting the people of the Congo, because those mines are owned by external parties from different nations and corporations who are exploiting those people. So I think my understanding of a lot of it is, especially when it comes to riba, is think of it as exploitation, because when you're making something out of nothing, there's someone or something being exploited,
for sure,
and that is what we fundamentally try to avoid, and that is why it's at its most fundamental level and basic level is we need to see a like for like. We need to see a fair exchange, because that is what our faith dictates: a fair exchange, profit sharing, risk sharing, rather than exploitation. Because at any point, if you didn't have any moral compass, you can exploit anyone and make money. Or you can exploit anyone and get something out of them, right? But you will fall into an oppressor category, and you're going to have to answer for that one day. And I think that has to be the understanding, right? So even if the same way we understand, because we have tawakkul, Allah is ar-Razzaq, we need to understand that avoid exploitation wherever it stands, and more will be given to you. You could be damaging your own risk.
I think a real kind of glimmer of hope in all of this is, with everything that's been happening in Gaza and in Israel recently, people are hyper aware of maybe not how, their financial habits further down the pyramid, like investing and saving, might be impacting people in that part of the world, but they're hyper aware of what their consumer spending is doing. Yeah. So we ran a survey at Muslim Tech Fest. We interviewed a few hundred people, and we found that 89% of them cared about BDS boycotting, divesting, and sanctions, right? Avoiding companies that had something to do with Israel and funding that part of the world, versus around like 76% who cared about avoiding riba.
Yeah.
Which, I don't know, it just seemed like really, really interesting. Everyone is really on top of it. And I think I don't know how, but we're trying to see if there's some way we can converge these ideas together. Because ultimately it's about, like you say, avoiding oppression, justice, and not exploiting anyone in that way. I think that's maybe how we get Islamic finance to the masses, because it's beyond just Muslims caring about this, right?
Absolutely. And honestly, what I've come to, as I've become, and I think that it's the education piece, because as I've become more knowledgeable, not just in my faith, but also just in anything, my practical understanding of anything, you begin to realize why. I think it's really important to understand why, because it's so easy to be like, this is haram, avoid it, like, then you're just like, oh, why? Why does it have to be so difficult? But when you understand why, and then you can explain to people why, it makes much more sense. And I'm probably exposing myself a bit here. Like, I'm someone who was fairly financially literate, well educated, from a good practicing Muslim family. And I honestly did not realize how serious riba was. That's the truth. Until I began to find out for myself.
I can say the same.
Yeah.
I run an Islamic finance business, but growing up, it wasn't like, this is the only thing that Allah declares war on, someone who is consuming riba. The only thing in the Quran where that is stated, which is hugely scary. It's a terrifying thought. But it's not like you go to Quran school and they teach you that.
It's culturally become normalized and desensitized. And I don't want it, because I'm very conscious about when I bring that up, and we can speak about this and understand it. But someone hearing it for the first time, I can imagine being in that position and being like, oh, these guys are so extreme. Shut up, man.
Yeah.
And like,
you're just saying I'm doomed to hell.
Yeah, no. And that's not what we're saying, right? Because this whole topic is so much more complex and nuanced than what you and I can talk about. But at the same time, like, I feel like people within the Muslim community, we mix up like the gravity of certain sins and what is haram and what isn't. For example, like, I know from things that I've seen, like, people like drinking, which obviously is so obviously seen as something that's there's no two ways about it, and it is equated to missing prayer, right? But the reality is, you can be a drunkard and pray. Yeah. And in the eyes of Allah, who knows, Allahu Alam, someone that prays consistently and is a sinner is considered to be less sinful than someone that doesn't pray at all.
No, for sure.
And that's just an example of me saying that, bringing this all back round, is that there is a lack of education on things that are important within the Muslim community. But I promise you, and I don't know whether that's because people feel like, being second or third gen, we grow up more liberal. I don't think that is the case, as we said before. I think it is a lack of education. So there's a responsibility, maybe even to people like me, to be like, whoa, we need to educate on certain things and explain why certain things are the way they are. And then we have, inshallah, people like yourself bringing options to the table, right? Or let's say IFG and Curate, they're marrying both together as well quite well. And of course, Wired, FIDA, and so many others, right? So we need more of those options to be available, but then we need people to do the education as well.
Yeah, for sure.
So we need more people to come forward. If there's more people like me, for example, who like become more literate in these things, talk about your experiences, and then present options. Because I think what people do is they find out about certain challenges and they're like, well, what am I supposed to do? Yeah. They go there and ask their parents, and their parents aren't going to know because they didn't have any of these options.
Or they go and talk to their imam, and their imam has no idea
exactly
anything financially literate. So yeah, they just think that's it. But now we have the internet. Exactly. That's why I think people care so much. Like that's was really heartening about Muslim Tech Fest, is we had so many people who, I think we go to a lot of these conferences like Halal Food Festival and Shopping Expo and all of this. We had people genuinely interested in Islamic finance and avoiding riba. And it was almost like they had a base level understanding, right? Because they'd seen some videos, read some article or something like that. And these are people in their mid-20s to mid-30s, right? And I don't think that's happened before. Yeah. I don't think it has. So I'm hopeful.
So am I. So, and what I also want to add is that Islamic finance is not limited to, mortgage is haram, riba is haram. Yeah. Islamic finance, by the way, or let's call it money, the concept of Islamic finance is very novel. It probably doesn't exist in terms of like, we've given it a name, right? But the teachings that we have, if applied universally, would solve a lot of world's problems.
Yeah.
I think there's a stat that always goes around. If zakat was applied globally, it would end world poverty.
Absolutely.
So if everyone in the world paid zakat, it would end world poverty. There were times before where societies existed where zakat was so efficient that there was no one left to pay zakat to in certain caliphates.
Yeah.
So there's concepts that exist that if they were applied universally would solve a lot of problems. And we need to have like firm belief in these teachings, because we believe in them firmly. We should be firm in our belief in them as well. And for example, whilst there are loads of challenges, there's amazing opportunities as well. So we aren't prevented. In Islam, we're not discouraged from being wealthy. Actually, to be wealthy is seen as an honorable position to have, and to chase wealth with good intentions is not a bad thing, which is why trade is encouraged. Investing and business is encouraged. What isn't encouraged is exploitative business habits, which were common before, by the way. So if you study the Seerah and you learn about the Sunnah, there's entrepreneurship and being enterprising is encouraged. I always use the example from the Ashara Mubashirin, which were the 10 Sahaba that were promised paradise. Of them, I think at least 5 or 6 were extremely wealthy, and by today's standards could, some people have said, potentially be billionaires. And they were amongst the 10 of the greatest companions who were extremely wealthy. Abdurrahman ibn Auf, Uthman ibn Affan, even Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. They were extremely wealthy individuals in their own right. But also there is honor, if that isn't written for you, there is honor in that as well. But there is nothing wrong with being wealthy. So I think we just have to like reframe.
Yeah, it's this kind of like unlearning we need to go through. The story that always got to me, and the one I always go on about, is the creation of the first waqf. So Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu anhu was one of the wealthiest companions, and when the Muslims came to Medina, everyone probably already knows the story, but the Muslims came to Medina, and there's another part to the story, is that they came to Medina and everyone thinks, okay, what was the first thing that the Muslims established? It was the masjid. But the second thing the Muslims established was actually the market. Yeah. Because they understood, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam really understood the need for Muslims to have their own financial stability, and they couldn't just rely on charity of the Ansar, of the people who were taking them in Medina. And there's a long winding story. I encourage people to look it up. We have the story on the Kestrl website. But ultimately, the Muslims and Uthman ibn Affan purchased a well. And that well was the idea of a first charitable endowment. It was the first waqf, I believe the first waqf in Islam. And this well not only allowed everyone to drink water, but it also fed date palms in the area. And those dates were then sold, and that money was then reinvested, to the point where today many of the high-rise buildings, and I think even the clock tower and many of the hotels in Makkah, in the Haram, are funded by that same fund that exists today. That wealth has grown and grown and grown and has lasted over 1,400 years, which is kind of mind-blowing. Yes. Right? To think that...
It's incredible.
Yeah, that your wealth can exist
incredible
that long. Like right now we think about generational wealth, and I want to live so my kids don't have to worry, or my grandkids don't have to worry. But imagine that an entire ummah can benefit from your wealth. I think that is what we need to be aspiring to.
100%. And you shouldn't think of it being out of the reach. And I pray that Kestrl, amongst the other businesses that we talk about, have that kind of effect on the ummah, because these things will live beyond you, right? And we need to stop being so small in our thinking of our own abilities, right? And this is like kind of akin to the comparison I make when people are so focused on income rather than wealth, right? And naturally, because of I guess the way we've been educated, the systems we exist in, we find ourselves chasing high incomes. And I described that, I spoke about this on the panel on Muslim Tech Fest as well. That's just a very level 1 layer. Wealth is multidimensional, and it actually crosses generations, right? So wealth is accumulated often through multiple lifetimes and is passed on. Your income, it stops when your job stops. So it's very layer 1, and we need to start thinking much more 3-4 layers, right? When it comes to wealth building and the benefits that your wealth can provide.
So let's talk about those levels then, because right now I think everyone's like, okay, I want to cross 6 figures, right? The 6-figure thing. for people who watch The Apprentice. Back when The Apprentice, they used to give you a job, they're like, I'm going to get a 6-figure salary, which at the time sounded huge. But then right now, even like 100K doesn't take you that far.
Oh, I'm glad you said that. So I've been dragged on this internet for making that exact comment. I went viral.
Say this about to happen to me.
No, you'll be fine. So I remember I said something to that. Of course, by the way, like alhamdulillah, like 100K salary is an amazing salary.
Absolutely.
And you should be grateful for it. What I said was, it doesn't go as far as it used to, which obviously is fine. Like, is because of inflation. Of course it doesn't, right? And
sorry, I dragged you back.
No, you're fine. No, you said it this time, not me. But the challenge I find, and I hope that it's different because I'm speaking to our community. We should have greater ambitions, right? Yes, chase high incomes, but don't stop there, because your money, by the way, or your wealth is not the money that you earn. It's the money that you keep and what you do with it, right? And I often use examples of, we actually have some footballers that follow us.
Okay.
And have engaged with us. And we know, for example, when we look at the stats of athletes, often they come from humble backgrounds, and then they're probably the first in their families to acquire high incomes. Yeah. And I think the statistics were so scary. I think we did this a few years ago, and we looked at the stats, and it was something like, I don't want to misquote, but it's something like over a quarter, actually it might have been about 40% of Premier League footballers within 5 years of retiring go broke, right? And you think about the salaries we hear of, like multiple £100,000 a week, right? Because if you're earning that much, but then you're spending that much, you're actually you're not materially better off. Right, you might be able to have loads. This is the age-old concept of lifestyle inflation, right? It might look like you have all of these things, but as soon as that income stops, your lifestyle rapidly deteriorates. Whereas wealth is what you keep and what you use to build, and actually, wealth is way more unsexy. It's way more boring, right? Whereas your income is tied to some kind of service or labor, and yes, it's a stream of income, but it's actually what you do with that income that will determine your wealth.
So just building on that, say there's someone listening to this, maybe they make like 25-30K a year, and they're thinking, all right, I'm managing to save a little bit of that, I've got my budgeting in order, I don't have major debts, I'm building up an emergency fund. What tips, and none of this is financial advice or investment advice, but what would you kind of guide someone to do?
Be very wary of the concept that I just spoke about, which is of lifestyle inflation. So where I work, I work in the legal sector, where it's very common for people, once they qualify, for their salaries to double. And I often have conversations with people where they say that I had more money when I earned half as much, because I had half the expectations of my own wealth, and I used to save X amount. Right. And now I earn twice as much. I now live in a nicer apartment. I've got nicer clothes. I've got a car now. So my expenses have gone up with my income. But actually, my expenses as a percentage of my income have gone up even more. So actually, with what I'm left with, I was left with more when I earned.
Yeah, you're worse off now.
Yeah. So even though I have all of these nicer things, and you can visually, you can see my wealth, or what you perceive to be my wealth, I actually don't have more money left over. So I think as your income increases, make sure you have like a firm, it's all behavioral. So money management is actually a soft skill rather than an exact science. It's actually much more behavioral. So as your income increases, make sure that like you're working towards building your wealth commensurate to that increase in your income. One example that I think Morgan Housel, he used the psychology of money.
Great
amazing book. And he says, for example, and I'm talking to our community here as well, when you see someone driving a really expensive car or has really expensive clothes, right, the perception, and you assume that they're really wealthy, right, but the only evidence that you have is if they're driving a £50,000 car, the only evidence that you have is that they probably are £50,000 lighter, or let's say several £100s a month lighter, because all you have is the evidence of money that they've spent, right? You then create your own story of what you think that they have based on what they've spent, but the only evidence that you have is the money that they've spent. And he uses also the example of this guy that drove this, I think it was like a 90 to 100 grand car, and he'd come in and his perception was, this guy's so rich, like he's got this car. And then like a few months later, he was driving in like a Toyota Corolla. No shade to Toyota Corollas, right? But it's not a 100 grand car. And he was asking the guy, he was like, what happened? He was like, I couldn't keep up with my payments anymore. He's like, what do you mean you couldn't keep up with your payments? I thought you were rich. He was like, yeah, it was all going on the car. So his perception of this guy's wealth had shattered.
Yeah.
So when you see wealth, remember, that's only evidence of money that they no longer have. So that's a good way to look at it. So
yeah, and I think that's the thing with so many US financial influencers.
Yeah.
Or these people who sell like courses online for how to get rich.
Yeah.
Like a lot of the time you'll see them in supercars, but I see so many people like CoffeeZilla who do these amazing exposés, getting rid of these scams, and they find like, okay, this person is leasing this car, and the only way they make money is by basically running a pyramid scheme of some kind, or selling courses of how to get rich and charging you like $500 or so to attend this 2-hour course, something like that. But yeah, just this idea of perception and perceived risk is just destroying so many people's base level of wealth in that way. Wow. Okay, we're running short on time.
No, all good.
But I want to just close up with just a couple of questions, quick fire questions. Top books you think people should read if they're really, or podcasts they should listen to learn more about this field?
So actually, the one that we just referenced, I'd say Morgan Housel's Psychology of Money is a great book to learn, because it helps you understand that your money management is much more about your behavior than how much you know, right? If people feel like, I don't know enough about money, I don't understand all this jargon, go read that book, listen to it. If you're more of a audio learner, you can download the audiobook. I think that's a really good one, and it will empower you to realize that you can.
I have to agree. I read it like 4 years ago. It changed I genuinely don't mean that. I don't say that lightly.
Yeah.
It changed the way I thought about everything. It's kind of what inspired partly Kestrl and also Money Talk, was just, wow, okay, what my parents went through and the way I grew up and the financial economics, situation that they lived through really influenced why they're quite conservative on certain aspects, whereas I'm more willing to take risk, right? Just because of what inflation rates were like when I grew up versus where they grew up. So I would really encourage people to check that one out.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really good one. Another one, if you're wanting to sort of understand where a lot of like the future focus will be, because I think there is going to be a greater shift towards ESG across the board. So this is for people who might be interested in that space. There's a book by a lady called Alice Ross called Investing to Save the Planet. And it made me question some of like what I thought I understood about like divesting from things, and but actually looking at like the practical way of what the future world with all the sustainability and green initiatives could look like. That's one that I'd recommend as well.
Okay.
Podcasts, I'd say listen to this one.
Listen
to the Muslim Money podcast, amongst others. I think there's individual episodes of things that I've benefited from, but one which is kind of adjacent to some of the conversations that we've been having. There's a podcast by Colin and Samir. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, where they interview creators, but creators who have become business enterprises of their own right. So they've done an episode with Ali Abdal, and I think that might encourage people to think beyond the normal fray of life, right? They might be empowered to be like, wow, I can try something, or I can do something, and this is how these other people who are now very successful, you can see the very real stories that they have and how they got there. Is another one that I'd recommend. Okay,
fantastic. Final question: if people want to find out more about you, about Millennial Money, where should they go?
I'm trying to be quite active on our Instagram, so at Millennial Money UK. But also now I've opened up my personal account, so if anyone wants to reach out to me, it's at Niaz Azad.
Okay, all right. Amazing. Niaz, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for listening to the Muslim Money Talk podcast. If you like what you heard, then please subscribe to Muslim Money Talk wherever you might have been listening to this. Give us a like and share it with someone who you think might be interested. It really, really helps us out. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum, and see you next time.